Oh. Today's story is about me completing the build on this SLC3. Specifically, today we're going to be focusing on the headset compression plug and some concerns I have, particularly considering I've watched a few videos recently of failures of a specialized SL7. And given the large chimney stack I have here and my size, I want to make sure this is mitigated against. It's a common belief in the industry that this compression plug's sole purpose is to be able to allow you to tighten the headset assembly via a top cap. But also, ones like this provide support to the carbon fiber steerer tube as you clamp the stem. Additionally, if you get longer ones like this, they can reduce the potential for any differential movement when you have a high chimney like this at the compression ring that sits on top of the top bearing of this headset. And that's where the SL7 steerers had failed. If you don't want to reinforce your carbon steerer, these things might be the weight Wheaties' dream, but I really would not necessarily recommend them. Of course, for aluminum steerers, that's a different story. I'm not really picking on wolf tooth here, but I'm sure this is good for pulling everything down. But on a carbon steerer, this is not going to cover your stem because it's basically an inch in length. Let's flip this around now and show you how Specialized has learned from the previous issues they have. This is the compression bung they give you, which also supports across the headset compression ring. Look at these space age graphics, but I'm just trying to point out that right here, the bung takes the stem clamping forces, then goes across the headset compression ring boundary, and this is where our unfortunate failures occurred on the SL7s, which Specialized has now mitigated against. Be really careful about extending your steerer past your stem. In this case, we're covered off, but sometimes people will think, oh, I'm not going to cut the steerer because I may sell the bike or I may want to have a more upright position, but you may not end up with coverage as a result of extending that steerer tube. Here is my trusty 3T stem and the excess Winspace steerer. Here is something I'm going to talk about later, and that is a tight fit in. Now let's I don't even have to tighten this up to 4 kilonewtons. And there's absolutely no chance I can pull that out. And trust me, my hands are not weak. So that steerer is clearly being compressed by the stem. Now let's look at these pieces of split plastic you get that are part of the FSA headset, or some even worse, cheaper knockoff ones. You cannot tell me that that would be as stiff as this on a tube. So when you run a high chimney stack, of course, a bigger guy like me is going to be a little bit concerned. Here is the stock Tolkien compression plug. An example of another one which is equally as good. Notice I'm weighing these with the top caps from FSA that came on an Argon 18 gravel bike I've got. And then another example, this one's got a chain tool in it for mountain bikes, and it just weighs a little bit more. Well done, Specialized. Then, this is one I got on Amazon because I'm concerned about flex at the top bearing. And finally, the secret weapon I've got is the one that I've manufactured, which I'll go into more detail about, which I'm actually going to install on the bike. So the way I replaced this 100 gram plus monstrosity was, I started off with a $20 aluminum tube off of Amazon, and I'm imitating Cervelo here. Then I cut down a star-fangled nut. I hammered it into the end carefully. I left a little bit of space on this end of the sleeve I used, and then I pulled it in very carefully from the lower end. Okay? Now, if I look at the carbon tube, it's not quite an exact fit. So at the suggestion of a machinist friend of mine, I put a thin layer of fiberglass around the aluminum tube and bonded it with some 2-ton epoxy. And what you end up with is this, which is significantly lighter. And I've also designed it so the top of the star-fangled nut is right at the top of this tape. So if I want at a later date, I can cut the steerer tube down by at least 1 inch to get rid of chimney stack, hopefully as I get more flexible. And then this was just a cap off of a random headset thing so that you don't have just a piece of carbon sticking out at the top of the aluminum tube. And it allows it to sit in for when you're bonding it. And I'll bond this in with JB Weld. Young men, you always test a hole first and make sure you got clearance. So here we're good. Now what I spared you was the 10 minutes of careful sanding I did to make sure that this is a tight fit, but it is not an interference fit. Because if you ended up hammering this thing in, you could end up splitting your carbon steerer tube, which obviously is not a very good idea. And the moment of truth, with probably way too much JB Weld. Boom. And young men, another piece of advice, always have stuff around to clean up after you jam things in holes. There we go. Perfect. Well, that wraps up this video, but the good news is now I can do the final weights and the final build video on this bike in the next one. So, of course, like, subscribe, and until next time, ride hard.